the 8th century, the Mongolian warriors invaded Japan. Now, Mongol warriors wore layers of leather armor. Okay, it wasn't heavy, but they took a lightweight layer and then overlapped it with another one, so it fit in pieces. And those straight swords had a difficult time penetrating the layers of leather. Okay, there was another problem with the Mongolian armor, and that was that interspersed throughout the armor were iron rivets that they put in there because when you swung and hit really hard, you could actually break your weapon hitting those the iron rivets. And the Japanese swords were chipping out and breaking. So first, it wouldn't penetrate the layers of leather. Second, the blades were breaking. And if you're in a fight for your life and you swing your sword and go, wah! And the blade breaks off and you're left holding a handle, you're going to lose. All right, if there's no app that you push a button and a lightsaber blade springs out, you're done. Okay, so after that invasion ended, the Japanese warriors and the smiths got together and they produced a weapon specifically designed to defeat the Mongols in case they came back. And what they discovered was a single-edged curved weapon had superior slicing and chopping dynamics. You can cut through things really, really well with a single-edged curved sword. And almost every warrior culture in world history has a version of those weapons. I mean, we don't really think of the European knights as using single-edged curved swords, but they still had them. The scimitars and falchions and falcatas, and okay, almost everybody had a weapon like that. The samurai warriors, though, took it one step further because the second problem was that the blades were chipping out and breaking. So they developed a process where when they heat treated the sword to make it harder, they put clay and ash along the back of the blade. So when they heated it up and then plunged it into the oil or water bath to cool the weapon and thus harden the blade, the edge hardened differently than the spine. So you had two different densities in the steel. The edge was really, really hard, so it would hold its edge and it would be able to penetrate deeper when you hit things. Does anybody have a pocket knife that you got for like $4 that says "Made in Pakistan" stamped on the blade? You can put an edge on that with a hone stone that you can shave hair right off your arm. But if you use that blade to open one cardboard box, you have a letter opener. And that's because the steel, number one, it's inexpensive steel, but number two, it's not very well heat treated, and the metal's really soft and it pushes out of shape really easy, and it doesn't cut very well. What the samurai did is they made the edge really, really hard so it would hold its shape, but the back of the sword was softer, and that meant it could absorb shock, so when you hit something really, really hard, the blade wouldn't break. And after you got it pulled out of her skull, you could move on to the next target. I like it. She's attacking me with the pen. In some cultures, the pen is mightier than the sword. We've discovered at my school that's not true. A shovel? Really? And I know it's a steampunk thing, but my first thought went to Mystery Men. Which is okay, because we have the shoveler over there, and I'm sure somewhere in this audience is the spleen. A word of advice. Hold it in. Alright, so what we have now are single-edged curved swords that have been heat treated differently. The edge is really hard, the back is soft. Amazingly enough, in English we call that differential heat treating. Different heat. So we're going to show you some toys. For sword nomenclature, blades have different names. They're classified by size. And in Japan, they had a unit of measurement called the shaku. Shaku is 11.9 inches. It's just under a foot. And I'm sorry, I keep looking at you two going, yeah, Star Trek, but I'm waiting for that one person in the red shirt to sit next to you. Because we need one, because I'm about to send my wife out into the audience with a sword. And the red shirt, as long as we have one, we know we'll be okay. At least until the first commercial break when that one's gone. Alright, one shaku on down, from 11.9 inches smaller. We gotta get out of here before one of them eats Guy. From one shaku or less. This was the Tanto, the Japanese dagger. This is a modern one. Okay, it's worth about 200 bucks. It's fully mounted. It is differentially heat treated. You can see that wavy line on it called a Himone. This is actually longer than a standard samurai knife, though. It was made this length. It's 11 3/4 inches long, and the reason why they made it this long is so you can do test cutting. Tommy Shigiri with it, where they cut through straw targets. If you're going to be at our stage show in here at 3, after my wife is done beating the crap out of me with a sword, we're going to be sacrificing a virgin.
Volunteer.
Volunteer. I have problems with words with a V. Sorry, I was just waiting for the flash as I start wandering over here with it. But this is 11 3/4 inches long. It's actually a little bit longer than a samurai would carry because this was a backup weapon that was worn. You held the spear, the naginata in your hands, the longsword was on your belt, and the tanto was worn through the front of the obi like this. It was a backup weapon if, heaven forbid, you dropped your sword or left it stuck in that guy while he fell to the ground, wrenching it out of your hands because he's rude. But it was supposed to be tucked in tight enough that it wouldn't get in your way while you were fighting. And having a blade this long, you see how far out that handle protrudes? So I'm swinging my sword, I cut down and miss, and reverse it to cut back up, and catch my own arm with that, and it stops my cut just shy of hitting them. To which they go, "Oh, thank you very much, chop." And then, "Oh, perfect, thank you." Did you bring enough coffee for all of us? I need coffee. The tanto, 1 shaku or less. We're going to let her walk around with that really quick while I keep talking. Here, you can have this part too. Well, yeah, you look like your eyes are bothering you and you can't see. I thought that was a perfect time to send you out in the audience with a weapon. 1 shaku or less, the tanto. All different shapes and sizes and names. I've already done the don't touch it.
Okay, but I was going to have people move closer to the ends where the aisles are, so I don't have to try to stagger down rows between them.
I was hoping you'd walk on the chairs with the swords and stuff. It'd be awesome! Hey, we paid our insurance. Walk on the ceiling. Yeah, I've seen her do that, crawl backwards up, but it's usually like at midnight on Friday the 13th or Halloween or on our wedding night. Right after our head went all the way around the circle. Alright, 1 shaku or less, the tanto. From 1 to 2 shaku, that's 12 to 24 inches of blade length, you have the Japanese short sword. It's known by a lot of different names. For our nomenclature, we call it the Wakazashi. This was not something the samurai carried so they could fight. They all fought with 2 swords. It's not really accurate, okay? After 1600, when the Tokugawas came into power, since the peasants weren't allowed to carry swords or own them, carrying the long sword and the short sword became a status symbol for the samurai. It was called daisho, that being 2 Japanese prefixes. Dai means great or large and sho means small. So literally it was big and small. And that was a pair of swords. The Wakazashi actually saw heavy use because the samurai carried it indoors. What a lot of people don't realize is that in Japan, much like in old England or even in this country, when you got home, the first thing you did when you got to your house is you took off the top hat and the cloak. For the Japanese, it was the yukata, the light jacket, or the michigi, like this is. And you hung it on a hook before you moved further into the house because you were removing that outer layer of clothing so you didn't take dust, dirt, deeper into the house. They took the shoes off and everything. The samurai also took off the long sword, the katana, and put it on a sword stand, the katana kake, for a very good reason. Anybody here familiar with Japanese architecture at all? How big are the rooms? Small! What are the walls made out of?
Paper!
Paper! And I know it's only Saturday morning, but how many of you have already been hit by somebody's cosplay weapon in the hallway? At least you hope that's what it was. We'll find out. And if you're wearing this big long sword sticking out behind you, which looks a lot like a cattail that just doesn't bend, and you're going to walk through the house, and you're going to get in, mom's not going to be very happy with you. And to be honest with you, even past that, where you're tearing up the walls that are made out of paper, framing those walls, Japanese houses were heavy wood frames, and being small, that meant close quarters. And if you were going to be attacked indoors and you have this giant long sword and you draw it out, and there it goes, stuck between two rafters. So while you're standing there like this, going, ah, ah, the ninja guy who snuck in is going, doink, got it! Playing tic-tac-toe on your abdomen. So they carried the short sword, the Wakazashi. One of the transcriptions for this blade translates as house sword, because the samurai would carry it indoors, because this gave them something to protect themselves when those pesky ninja came in. Because maybe you have a rule about no weapons in your house, but that doesn't mean they're going to follow it when they break in to try to kill you and your family. And this way, when this ninja came sneaking in, went, I'm going to kill you. No, you're not. And the short sword worked really, really well for close quarters combat. There's an amazing amount of techniques available when one side is sharp and the other isn't. Where you can move the weapon a lot closer to your body and do different things with leverage, where you can cut. That really has nothing to do with this lecture. We'll talk short sword techniques later. The Wakazashi, 1 shaku to 2 shaku. This also is a modern one. It's worth about $200. It has a straight temper line. It's really not that exciting. So we're going to move on because we have much better toys for show and tell today. Okay? And remember the question, we'll come back to it. Because I kind of got off to a late start, and I don't want to short anybody on seeing the pretty things. So, up to 1 shaku, Tanto, or dagger. 1 to 2 shaku, the short sword, Wakazashi. The next category up is from 2 to 2.5 shaku. So if you see a blade, Japanese blade, that's 24 to 30 inches long, what you have is the katana, or longsword. Arguably the most famous handheld weapon of all time, and certainly one of the most effective. When the smiths and the warriors got together and designed this weapon to be able to penetrate the layers of leather armor, they succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, short of a lightsaber. Any warrior with a good sword, training, and enough enthusiasm can cut through a human body with a sword. But the katana was so good at severing an entire body, they actually used to test these blades and see how many they could cut through in one swing. And don't ask why I know this or why I find it relevant or a challenge. The record for cutting through human bodies in one swing with the katana is 7. How they got 7 people to hold still for that test, I have no idea. Actually, we were at a Red Fair in Illinois, and I said that. I'm like, I don't know how they got 7 people to hold still. And as luck would have it, there was a whole row of college guys on the front row. I said, how they got 7 people to hold still for that, I have no... Is that a belly dancer? And they all turned, and I jumped off stage and went, boom! Yeah! And all the grown-ups are laughing. I look back at my teenage son and go, Michael, do you see? He's going, what, Dad? Where? And just so we're clear, at the end of the row, there was not a belly dancer. Sitting at the end of the row was a sword vendor friend of mine. He weighs 400 pounds, and he was wearing a kilt. We still get therapy bills from that college. Like, no, our insurance doesn't cover that. But 7 bodies in one swing. This sword was amazing in its ability to go entirely through one opponent, which is a big deal because samurai sword combat was about multiple opponents. And being able to cut entirely through one leaves the blade clear to move into the next one. And we can talk combative strategies later. We have a sword class tonight at 8:30 where we're going to arm you and let you whack each other. And did you notice that it was the girls that clapped and all the guys looked scared? Good! You're learning! All right, this is a remounted World War II blade. It was made in 1944, and it's worth about $5,000. And that's a lot, because until recently I'd never owned a car that cost that much. Crappy transportation, really nice toys. Life is all about priorities. But I'm not going to hand this one around because we're going to trump that really fast. We're going to start with my wife's blade today. When we talk about the katana, this is one of 13 blades that were made for the top Shinto shrines in Japan 300 years ago. It's really, really lightweight because it was designed to be hung on the wall in a position of honor. But if the temple was under attack, if people were trying to burn it down or desecrate it, the priests that ran the temples were supposed to be able to take the sword down and use it to drive off invaders. And since Shinto priests are not generally elite athletes, mixed martial artists who are doing 500 push-ups and sit-ups every morning before breakfast, they needed a weapon that was light enough that they could use. So what you have is a ridiculously sharp, lightweight. When I say ridiculously sharp, the first time my wife let me cut with this at a demonstration with the straw mats, I stepped forwards and went, boom! And the mat didn't move. And I'm a man, I'm married, I'm used to being wrong. My first thought was, oh my God, I missed. It's a 3-foot stationary target from point blank range and I missed. So I looked at the sword to see if there was a hole in it. And then I looked, I'm like, I couldn't have missed. And I'm panicked because there's people watching, I don't know what to do. And so finally I just reached out and I poked the mat and the top part of it fell off. And I went, yes! I meant to do that. This was brought back to this country at the end of World War II. It was in cheap metal gunto mountings with no handle. And when we brought this to our instructor, who's Japanese, moved to this country in 1980, does anybody remember the first 2 Ninja Turtle movies? Do you remember Shredder's henchman, Tatsu? The one that Casey Jones beat up with a golf club? Yeah. That's my sensei. And every time I've mentioned golf, he flinches. We showed this blade to my instructor to see if it was big enough and strong enough to be able to do test cutting with, and he freaked out. Because while he was in Japan as the head of the Tiamaru Association, Japanese military sword, he delivered a paper at the college, a lecture, on those blades. And this sword came to us in a crappy sheath with no handle. Unlike most of the blades that you'll find, this handle is the same age as the blade. So is the Suba, the Fuchi, the Kashira, all the mountings are original with the blade except for the wrap. Do you know why? He had the handle. It's a small room. And he didn't like me before, but finding out we had this blade, he really hates me now. But he did put the handle on the sword for us. I'm going to let my wife walk around with this. This is the time to be nice to her, because she really loves using that sword. But again, that's one of 13 that were made for these Shinto shrines. And really, really lightweight. Not intended for the battlefield, not intended to cut against people wearing armor, but designed to use against bad guys. Breaking into your home at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Kill them all.
Yeah, heaven forbid you decide to break into my house. Because once you get past the 200-pound Japanese guard dogs, yeah, I know, they don't look very intimidating right now, do they? Then you have to get past my wife with the shotgun. We're a weird family. For Valentine's Day, I got her an Ivor Johnson pump-action 12-gauge. You know why? Because she said that's what she wanted, and I was too afraid to not get it for her. Which, when you think about it, is dumb, because what I just did is I was afraid, so I gave her a pump-action shotgun. Love you, happy Valentine's Day. And I'm going, okay, this is not out of range. And then for close quarters combat, she has that. Hi, sweetie. I love you, and I'm still not going to be that brave, because from right here she can still probably get me. All right, that's the katana, the longsword. 2 to 2.5 shaku, 24 to 30 inches. And most World War II blades you find are going to run between 26.5, about 26.25, and 27.5 inches long. Now the Japanese believe if big is good, bigger is better.
Yes.
And I believe that too because, well, I have to. I'm 6'7". So there was a category further up from that. From 2.5 to 3 shaku was the dai katana. Remember I mentioned before, dai is a prefix that means great. The dai katana meant great sword, or great longsword. And the cutting edge on these blades was between 30 and 36 inches. This is the reason why I still get invited out in public. It's because I have temporary guardianship of this. This blade is 700 years old. The mountings on it, the scabbard, the saya in Japanese, are relatively new. This is 6 years old. The tsuba, the handguard on this, is antique. But by Japanese sword standards, having a 200-year-old tsuba on a 700-year-old blade is almost an insult. But I did that because I wanted to use this, which also gets me in trouble with purists, because I had a gentleman in Dallas, Texas last year that started chewing me out that I actually used this blade. It belongs in a museum. It should be in a glass case. I'm like, it's a sword. It was made to be used. I use it correctly, I'm careful, and I honor the blade because I believe the blade has more honor in being used than it does being behind a glass case where no one can see it or touch it. I mean, this is history. Somebody lived and died. He's been gone 650 years. Something he made, the sweat of his brow, is still in use literally every day. To me, that's way too cool to leave in a museum on a shelf. And I don't believe in using it poorly. Thank you. The gentleman that I'm referring to was a collector, and he was angry and said, I don't deserve to have a sword like this. Someone should take it away from me. Literally, we're in the hallway after a panel, and he's yelling at me about it. He's like, somebody should take that away from you. I'm like, sir, while you're being rude to the 6'7" martial arts instructor, this is a good time to point out that that sword you don't think I should be using is in my hands. He's like, what do you mean? Are you threatening me? Are you still talking? Duh! Alright, so I want to show you this blade. You're going to see, as soon as I draw this sword out, there's an engraving on the blade. That engraving is called a Horimono. And about 150 years ago, they became in vogue for Japanese swords where they started putting them on the blade. Nowadays, they just stamp them into the metal. But back when this sword was made, and this Horimono was original with the blade. The smith put this on 700 years ago when he forged the sword. This Horimono, when you look at it, is a Japanese straight sword with an oriental dragon curled around it. It is one of the symbols of the emperor. And on the back side of the blade is a character that predates kanji that identifies this particular blade as the water dragon. Where we talked about Mulan, did anybody see Warriors of Virtue? Because hey, if we're not going to do Disney or Ninja Turtles, we're going to talk martial philosophy by kangaroos that do kung fu. But in Warriors of Virtue, there was one of them that represented each of the cardinal elements in Oriental culture from way back when. And there were 5. There was virtue of fire, water, earth. Okay.
Isn't that last Airbender, which has water and dragons and stuff?
I have no idea. Please don't talk Airbender. You're going to get my wife all excited and she's going to keep talking.
Cora! Cora!
See what you started. How bad it is? You just got a new SUV for traveling. And do you know what its name is?
Appa!
It's like points off my man card every time I call the vehicle by its name.
Now ask who named it.
He did.
I was kidding! So now she's looking for a miniature 6-legged buffalo to hang from the rearview mirror. I'm like, really? It's genetics gone wrong. She's like, no, it's a cartoon. I'm like, same difference. Right. This blade is identified as the water dragon, and 2 years ago at a sword show in Chicago at a Tokenkai, we got to meet one of the other 4 blades. Wow. An elderly Japanese sword collector who lives in Washington State now was at that show, and he had the fire dragon blade. It was very, very cool. He had it behind the table. He started talking to my wife and realized she knew something about swords. So he got that out, and my wife pointed at it and said, we have the water dragon sword. And he said, no, you don't. This is 700 years old. There's only 5 of these blades. She said, no, we have that one. He's like, no. And she's like, yeah, we do. Sweetheart, go get. So we had a family reunion in Chicago, and it was awesome. You're going to be able to see when you look at this blade the swirls in the steel that denote the tamahagane. It was different types of steel forged and folded together. So I'm going to let her walk around and show this to you. She'll move it so you can get good pictures and stuff, because this is intimidating to have. Did you name the sword? No. It's 700 years old. It probably has a name, and I'm going to feel stupid naming it like I own that sword. To me, that's like two fleas arguing over who owns the dog they're riding on. That sword's going to be here long after I'm gone. You know, as soon as I'm dead, my wife and son get done fighting over who gets the sword.
Please have your cameras out. Since we're running a little low on time, I'm still going to be moving fairly quickly. Just a warning. Not that.
Yeah, that should go well. Blink, little drop of blood, head falls off. I've seen that movie. Alright, and really fast. While she's showing that, remember I said big is good, bigger is better? The Katana. The samurai had one step up from that. They had a monstrous blade called the Nodachi. Really, really famous in video games. Remember Soul Calibur? There's always that chick with the chest out to here and a waist like this big around. And in one hand she's spinning around a blade that looks like it belongs to the guy in Silent Hill. I can't wait to meet that sword. Because really big swords like that are very heavy, but the samurai had a monstrous blade that was from 3 shaku on up, so 36 inches longer. This one was handmade for me by a gentleman who lives in Eugene, Oregon. And because I'm a freak of nature, at my height, I still can draw this and use it normally. But it's a big, heavy blade. These swords were really common on the battlefield in the 16th century. Not as one-on-one combat weapons, because at this size, frankly, they're too slow. I swing, I miss, and she calls Jimmy John's and orders lunch, has a latte, and I'm still in Matrix mode going, whoa, trying to come back. When she looks up, puts down her napkin daintily, and goes, oh, you're still here. Stab. Okay, it was just too slow. It was used on the battlefield, though, because for large troop combat, you would have a whole row of people with the yari, Japanese spears. I would have a whole row of people with spears, and you'd be trying to stab each other. And some officer got the brilliant idea that you could take a large, a highly skilled samurai, such as myself, put us on the end of the row with this big sword, and when your row goes to stab with the spears, my job is to step in from the side and go, flump! And cut all the heads off with spears. Because we're on the battlefield in full armor, we have spears and swords, and you have a stick, you're going to lose. So after the first 2 or 3 rows got wiped out, some guy in the back wearing the Captain Kirk outfit goes, hey, we can do that too. So you pick a big dumb-looking guy with a sword. Hi. I give him a sword and he fights on the end and he tries to do the same thing to our side. And to keep him from doing that, we would fight with each other. And because both weapons were huge and oversized, there wasn't a net gain or loss in combat efficiency. It kind of evened out. Now I mentioned these are 3 shaku on up. You know what the longest traditionally made folded steel differentially heat treated Nodachi in history was? Guess how long they made one of these blades? 54? You are an optimist. 13 shaku. You're closer than he was, but it's still scary. You're
24.
The longest sword traditionally made was 17 feet 11 inches. Just over 18 shaku. It was unmounted. It went on a wall in a temple. And obviously they didn't mount it because just putting a handle on it, it would have been 4.5 feet long for the handle. And you couldn't swing the sword. One person could not pick that up and swing it. It just was too heavy. And when asked why they would make a blade that long, I just went, I don't know. And I said that at a convention. Like, I have no idea why they would make a sword that was 18 feet long. And my son, sitting behind me, said, Dad, what country was this? I'm like, don't interrupt me, I'm doing it. He's like, what country? I'm like, Japan! How big was the sword? 17 feet 11 inches. And he goes, and you don't know why they made that? I'm like, no! And he went, Godzilla, hello! Which is why my son is grounded. For life. All right. We are at 11:55. That means we have 5 minutes. We got to go really fast, but we did have a couple people raise their hand for questions. Sir, did you still have a question, or can we talk later?
Talk.
Okay. In the camouflage jacket. I know I shouldn't be able to see that. I'm sorry. The glasses with the hat.
I want to shake your hand.
That's not a question. Don't raise your hand ever again. You can shake my hand afterwards. We're an anime con. I'll even give you a hug, but at my school that normally results in a hip throw and then stepping on your neck. Are you okay with that? That was kind of like our first date. Yes?
For a sword that's like over 700 years old, how do you keep it in such pristine condition?
I don't actually drive it. I just rub it with a diaper. Oh, sorry. That was the Ferris Bueller moment. We actually have an entire panel on sword cleaning and maintenance stuff. There are 2 approved products for cleaning Japanese swords that will help keep them from aging and getting worse. Do not use Brasso or 50-in-1 oil. It's not very good for it. One is Flitz Metal Polish. You can get Flitz Metal Polish at almost any gun shop or Ace Hardware. It's what they use to clean aircraft instrumentation and stuff. Flitz works great on swords. There's a Japanese product called Pikal. Pikal. And they use it to clean electron microscopes. Those 2 things will help preserve blades and keep them clean. Yes?
That's a great question. You said you had your swordsmanship panel in. It's not in the program?
It better be. Yeah, it is. Saturday night, 8:30 to 9:30. It's after the cosplay contest and before the rave. So before you slam dance, smack somebody in the head with a sword. Get them woozy. It adds to your dance moves.
Is it in here?
Yes, it's actually in here. So there will be plenty of room and we'll try to break the lights. That's it, right? Yes, really fast.
How did you start your collection?
Slowly. I have very, very little money. But with what I do for a living, people actually bring swords to me. The 700-year-old blade showed up at my school because some guy was given a sword by a buddy who found it in his grandfather's barn after he passed away. It was leaned in a corner, collecting rainwater would run down the side and then down the blade. So when we got that 700-year-old blade, it was actually covered in giant black scale rust and had to be very, very carefully restored out in Oregon. And I had to fly out to Oregon to get the blade and drive it back because they wouldn't ship it. And I was okay with that. And this is why we don't fly anywhere for conventions. We drive because I don't trust... we're friends with Johnny Young Bosch, who's a voice actor in one of the Power Rangers. Last year we did a con with Johnny in Wichita, Kansas, and he flew back to LA, and first of all they took him to the wrong airport. There's 2. His car was at LAX, and they flew him back to Orange County. But he called us and said, hey, I made it back to LA, and my luggage successfully landed in Cleveland, Ohio. And I went, we're not doing that. My sword will die if it has to go to Cleveland. Yes, sir, really fast.
How old are your dogs?
We have an Akita panel tomorrow, or Sunday at 3 o'clock. The black one is 8.5. Her son, right there, Kuma, is 6. All right, black. You gotta go fast.
Whereabouts any of the other swords in that family?
Just the fire. And we have a standing invitation from that nice Japanese gentleman to come stay at his house for a weekend if we make it all the way out to Washington. Normally we do Midwest and East Coast conventions. But if we get out to the West Coast, we get to see his private collection with the really valuable swords because the $40,000 one's really not that expensive. Really?
He has a Masamune blade at home.
And if you're into Japanese sword collecting, Masamune and Muramasa, if you have one of those, you have a sword worth at least 6 figures minimum. And I stood in line at a sword show for 45 minutes once to handle a Masamune blade. And he has one in his vault. He shouldn't have told me that. I can find him. Anyway, we gotta go because I...